At 5, my parents abandoned me at baggage claim. A stranger saved me, and only after he died did I learn he was a hidden tycoon who left me $5.5 million. My parents reappeared to sue me for it. In court, they smirked. Until the bailiff announced, "All rise for judge." The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport burned into my memory that August afternoon in 1998. I was 5 years old, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, standing next to a mountain of suitcases at baggage claim carousel number 7. My mother had told me to wait there while she went to find a bathroom. That was 3 hours ago. Airport security found me after the janitors reported a small child crying near the unclaimed luggage. Officer Patricia Mills took my hand gently and asked where my parents were. I told her Mommy said to wait. She said she'd be right back. Officer Mills searched for 45 minutes before checking the parking records. The silver Honda Accord registered to Linda and Frank Morrison had exited the airport exactly 17 minutes after their flight from Phoenix had landed. They had planned this. Later, court documents would reveal my parents had discussed abandoning me for weeks. My father had lost his job. My mother wanted to move to California to pursue an acting career. A 5-year-old daughter didn't fit their new life plan. They thought someone would find me and place me in foster care, and they could disappear without the burden of a child they never wanted in the first place. But Arthur Pennington found me first. Arthur was 72 years old, returning from visiting his daughter in Arizona. He watched as Officer Mills tried to calm me down, witnessed my tears and confusion, and something in him refused to walk away. He approached the officer and asked what would happen to me. She explained the process: Child Protective Services, emergency foster placement, attempts to locate family. Arthur asked if there was another option. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he told Officer Mills. "My house is too quiet. My daughter lives across the country. I'm a retired accountant with a clean record and enough room in my life for someone who needs a home. The system doesn't usually work that way. Emergency custody requires background checks, home studies, mountains of paperwork." Arthur began the process immediately. He hired an attorney, submitted to background checks, opened his home for inspection. The process took 3 months of temporary foster placement before he became my legal guardian. Within 18 months, he'd adopted me completely. Arthur lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet Dallas suburb. Nothing about his lifestyle suggested wealth. He drove a 15-year-old Buick, shopped at discount grocery stores, and wore the same 3 cardigan sweaters on rotation. He taught me to read using books from the public library. We ate dinner together every night at 6 o'clock, and he always asked about my day as if every detail mattered tremendously. He never tried to replace my parents. When I asked about them during those first few months, Arthur answered honestly, "They made a choice that hurt you deeply. That's on them, not you. You deserve better, and I'm going to make sure you get it." I called him Papa Arthur. He called me his second chance at getting life right. School became my sanctuary. Arthur attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every science fair. He helped me with homework at the kitchen table, patiently explaining long division and grammar rules. When I struggled with reading comprehension in 2nd grade, he read with me every single night until the words started making sense. By 4th grade, I was reading 3 grade levels ahead. Arthur worked part-time consulting for small businesses, enough to keep us comfortable but not extravagant. We took affordable vacations to state parks, spent weekends at free museums, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes. He saved diligently for my college fund, contributing whatever he could spare each month. I never felt poor because I never felt unloved. When I turned 13, I asked Arthur why he'd taken me in that day at the airport. We were sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge as dusk settled. "I saw myself in you," he said quietly. "Not the abandonment part, but the need for someone to believe in you." My father told me I'd never amount to anything. Worked manual labor his whole life and couldn't understand why I wanted to go to college. "Your parents told you through their actions that you weren't worth staying for. I wanted to prove to you what my wife proved to me, that you're worth everything." Arthur died 2 months after my 22nd birthday. A heart attack in his sleep, quick and painless according to the doctor. I had just graduated from Texas State University with my teaching degree and was preparing to start my first teaching position in the fall. I'd come home that weekend to celebrate my new job and spend time with him. Finding him was the worst moment of my life. Calling 911 while performing CPR, I'd learned in a college health class, knowing it was already too late. Sitting in the hospital hallway as a kind-eyed nurse confirmed what I already knew. Papa Arthur was gone. The funeral was small. Arthur's daughter flew in from Seattle, along with a handful of his old colleagues and neighbors. I delivered the eulogy, barely making it through without breaking down completely. His daughter hugged me afterward and whispered, "He loved you so much. You made his last years meaningful." Arthur's attorney, Lawrence Davidson, called me 2 days later. Mr. Davidson had handled Arthur's adoption petition all those years ago and apparently, his will as well. He asked me to come to his office that Friday afternoon. The law office occupied the second floor of an older building in downtown Dallas. Mr. Davidson was in his late 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He offered me coffee and cookies before settling behind his massive oak desk. "Your father was a very private man," Mr. Davidson began. "What I'm about to tell you might come as quite a shock." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were financial statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios. Arthur Pennington, the man who'd clipped coupons and driven an ancient car, had a net worth of approximately $18 million. I stared at the numbers, unable to process them. This had to be a mistake. Arthur made his fortune in commercial real estate in the 70s and 80s, Mr. Davidson explained. He bought properties in what became high-growth areas, sold at exactly the right times, and invested conservatively. After his wife passed away, he simplified his lifestyle dramatically. He didn't need material things. He valued experiences and relationships. My hands trembled as I flipped through documents showing properties in Dallas, Austin, and Houston. Investment accounts with major firms. Treasury bonds. A diversified portfolio managed by one of the most prestigious wealth management companies in Texas. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. Mr. Davidson smiled gently. "He wanted you to grow up normal? To understand the value of money earned through hard work, not inherited wealth. He also wanted to make sure you loved him for who he was, not what he had." Arthur was deeply scarred by people who'd used him for money in the past. He trusted very few people completely. He trusted me. "More than anyone else in the world," Mr. Davidson confirmed. "Which is why he left you $5.5 million, along with detailed instructions for your future." The room spun. $5.5 million. I was a college student working part-time at a campus bookstore, eating ramen 3 nights a week. Mr. Davidson walked me through the specifics. $2 million was placed in a trust I could access immediately for education, housing, and emergency expenses. The remaining $3.5 million would be distributed over time, $1 million when I turned 25, another $1 million at 30, and the rest at 35. Arthur had set up guidelines encouraging me to pursue meaningful work, continue my education, and use the money to help others. "The rest of his estate goes to various charities and his daughter," Mr. Davidson said. "He made sure everyone he cared about was taken care of. But you were his priority. He spent the last 15 years of his life ensuring your future would be secure." I cried in that office for 20 minutes while Mr. Davidson quietly provided tissues and didn't say a word. When I finally composed myself, he handed me one more envelope. "Arthur wrote this for you to read after the legal details were settled. Take your time with it." I waited until I got back to my apartment to open the letter. Arthur's familiar handwriting covered 3 pages. "My dearest girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just learned I wasn't quite as broke as I pretended to be. I hope you can forgive an old man's deception. I wanted to give you something more valuable than money, a normal childhood where you were loved for yourself, not for what you might inherit. Your biological parents abandoned you at that airport because they saw you as a burden. I want you to understand, with every fiber of your being, that you were never a burden to me. You were a blessing. A gift. The greatest joy of my later years. This money is yours to use wisely. I trust your judgment because I've watched you grow into a thoughtful, compassionate, intelligent young woman. Finish your education. Build a life that brings you fulfillment. Help others when you can. Fall in love with someone who sees your worth. Create the family you deserved from the beginning. And remember, you were always worthy of love. You were always enough. You were always worth staying for. All my love, Papa Arthur." I kept that letter in my nightstand drawer for years. On difficult days, I'd reread it and remember that someone had chosen me. Someone had stayed. Graduating from Texas State felt bittersweet without Arthur there to watch me walk across that stage. But I graduated summa cum laude with my teaching degree, fueled by determination to make him proud. I accepted a position teaching third grade at an elementary school in a lower-income Dallas neighborhood. The money Arthur left me meant I could choose a job based on passion rather than salary. Teaching became my calling. I worked with kids who reminded me of myself, those who needed someone to believe in them, to see past their circumstances to their potential. I used part of my inheritance to stock my classroom with books, supplies, and resources the school budget couldn't provide. Every student got birthday recognition. No one went hungry during lunch. Field trips became possible. My students' parents called me Miss Emma, never knowing I could afford to live anywhere, do anything. I rented a modest apartment, drove a reliable used car, and lived comfortably but not extravagantly. Arthur had taught me that wealth wasn't about what you showed off, but what you could do for others. I was 26 years old, finishing my 4th year of teaching, when Linda and Frank Morrison found me. 28 years earlier, they'd abandoned their 5-year-old daughter at an airport and disappeared. They'd moved to Los Angeles, where my mother worked various restaurant jobs while failing to launch an acting career. My father bounced between construction gigs and unemployment. They'd had another child, a son, when I was 8. They'd raised him while forgetting I existed. Until they heard about Arthur's death and my inheritance. I'll never know how they found out. Maybe they'd kept minimal tabs on me over the years. Maybe someone they knew saw Arthur's obituary, which mentioned his adopted daughter. Maybe they hired a private investigator once they realized there might be money involved. They showed up at my school on a Tuesday afternoon in April. The principal called me to the office during my planning period. 2 people I barely recognized sat in the waiting area. My mother had gained weight and looked older than her 52 years. My father was balding, his face weathered and tired. "Emma," my mother said, standing up with tears in her eyes. "Oh my God, Emma. It's really you." The principal looked confused. "Miss Emma, do you know these people?" "They're my biological parents," I said flatly. "The ones who abandoned me at DFW when I was 5. My mother flinched. My father cleared his throat. "We'd like to talk to you," he said. "Privately, if possible." I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop after school, mostly out of morbid curiosity. What could they possibly have to say after nearly 2 decades? They showed up with a lawyer. That's when I knew this wasn't about reconnecting. This was about money. Their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, laid out their position. As my biological parents, they argued they were entitled to a portion of my inheritance. They'd fallen on hard times. They had another child to support, medical bills, credit card debt. Arthur Pennington had been a stranger who'd stolen their daughter and then manipulated her into believing she wasn't wanted. They'd been young and struggling when they left me at that airport, but they'd never stopped loving me. I listened to this fiction with growing fury. "You abandoned me," I said quietly. "You left me next to a baggage carousel and drove away. You chose to do that." "We were desperate," my mother pleaded. "We were broke, scared, drowning. We thought you'd be better off in the system, that someone would adopt you who could give you more than we could." Someone did adopt me. He gave me everything: love, stability, education, and yes, financial security. None of which came from you. Their attorney jumped in. "Texas law recognizes parental rights. You're their biological child. We believe we can make a compelling case that they're entitled to compensation for the years they were deprived of raising you." "You weren't deprived of anything. You chose to leave." "We were young and made a mistake," my father said. "Doesn't everyone deserve a second chance?" I looked at these strangers who'd contributed DNA but nothing else to my life. "Arthur gave me everything you refused to. He showed up every single day. He chose me. You chose yourselves. We're prepared to file a lawsuit," their attorney said. "We'd prefer to settle this amicably." "How much?" I asked coldly. $2 million would be fair," the attorney replied. "Considering the circumstances." I stood up. "See you in court." They filed their lawsuit 3 weeks later. Morrison v. Morrison, a case of my biological parents suing me for a portion of my inheritance from the man who'd actually raised me. Their legal argument centered on parental alienation, claiming Arthur had unfairly influenced me against them and enriched himself with the role that should have been theirs. I hired Veronica Chen, one of the best family law attorneys in Dallas. She'd handled complex custody cases and wasn't intimidated by aggressive litigation tactics. "They don't have much of a case," Veronica told me during our first meeting. "Parental rights were legally terminated when Arthur adopted you. They can't claim entitlement to assets from someone who had no relationship to them." "Then why are they doing this?" "Because lawsuits are expensive and stressful. They're hoping you'll settle just to make them go away. It's a shakedown." I refused to settle. My parents had given me nothing. They'd left me traumatized and alone in an airport terminal. Arthur had given me everything, and I would honor his legacy by protecting what he'd worked so hard to provide. The lawsuit affected every aspect of my life. My principal pulled me aside one afternoon, concerned about the stress I was under. Several parents had heard about the case through local news coverage and asked if I needed support. My teaching colleagues rallied around me, bringing me coffee during difficult depositions and covering my classes when I had to meet with Veronica. But the worst part was the media attention. A local television station picked up the story, "Abandoned Child Inherits Millions, Birth Parents Sue." The headline made it sound like a soap opera instead of my actual life. Reporters called my school, showed up at my apartment building, tried to interview neighbors and former teachers. My parents gave interviews portraying themselves as heartbroken victims who'd been separated from their beloved daughter by a wealthy man with an agenda. I watched one of these interviews in Veronica's office, my stomach churning as my mother dabbed at her eyes and talked about the daughter she'd lost all those years ago. "She's convincing," I said bitterly. "She almost sounds like she believes it herself." "Narcissists often do," Veronica replied. "They rewrite history in their own minds until they genuinely believe their version of events. Your mother has probably convinced herself that abandoning you was some noble sacrifice rather than selfish abandonment." The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed details I'd never known. My parents' attorney subpoenaed records from the day I was abandoned, hoping to find something that would paint Arthur in a negative light. Instead, the records showed that airport security had documented the incident thoroughly. Officer Mills had filed a detailed report noting that surveillance cameras had captured my parents' movements through the terminal, though the actual footage had long since been destroyed per standard retention policies. Her report described how my father had checked his watch repeatedly while my mother knelt down, spoke to me briefly, pointed toward the baggage claim, and then walked away without looking back. They'd moved quickly through the terminal, never once glancing over their shoulders to check on me. The report also documented Arthur's actions. He'd been sitting in the terminal area waiting for his connecting flight when he noticed me standing alone. Officer Mills had noted that he waited nearly 20 minutes, clearly expecting an adult to return, before approaching her to ask about my situation. His concern had been genuine and immediate. Veronica planned to use Officer Mills' detailed documentation at trial if necessary. But more discoveries emerged that strengthened our case. My parents had left Phoenix with significant credit card debt and had filed for bankruptcy 6 months after abandoning me. They told creditors they had no dependents. When they applied for government assistance in California, they declared themselves childless. Every official document they'd filed for 2 decades indicated they had only one child, my younger half-brother. "They didn't just abandon you physically," Veronica explained. "They erased you from their lives completely. They made deliberate, repeated choices to pretend you didn't exist. This wasn't a moment of crisis they regretted. This was a sustained decision." My father's deposition was particularly revealing. Under oath, he admitted they discussed leaving me at the airport for several weeks before actually doing it. He claimed it was my mother's idea, but he'd agreed because they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. When Veronica asked why they hadn't pursued legal options like surrendering me to child services through official channels, he had no answer. "We just needed a fresh start," he'd said, as if I were an old couch they'd left on the curb. The emotional toll was enormous. I'd spent years in therapy as a teenager, processing the abandonment and building healthy attachments. Arthur had made sure I had access to good mental health care, understanding that trauma didn't disappear just because you were loved in the present. Now all that old pain resurfaced. I had nightmares about airports, about being left behind, about Arthur not being there when I woke up. My students noticed I wasn't myself. Third graders are perceptive in ways adults underestimate. One of my students, a boy named Tyler whose father had walked out on his family, brought me a drawing during recess. It showed two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with the words "Family is who loves you" written in crayon. "My mom says you're going through something hard," Tyler told me seriously. "But you taught us that hard things don't last forever." I kept that drawing on my desk throughout the entire legal battle. On the darkest days, when my parents' attorney sent particularly vicious legal correspondence, or when the judge assigned to our case initially seemed sympathetic to their claims of parental alienation, I'd look at Tyler's rainbow and remember why I was fighting. Not just for myself, but for every kid who needed to know that real family chooses you every single day. The case dragged on for 10 months. Depositions, document requests, mediation attempts that went nowhere. My parents played the victim card constantly, poor struggling parents who'd made one mistake and lost their daughter forever. They claimed they'd searched for me but couldn't find any records. They painted Arthur as a wealthy opportunist who'd taken advantage of their temporary crisis. None of it was true, but their attorney was skilled at spinning narratives. My mother cried during her deposition, talking about how much she'd missed me, how she thought about me every single day. It might have been moving if I hadn't read the court documents proving they'd actively fought to prevent anyone from locating them after abandoning me. My father claimed he'd wanted to come back for me, but my mother had insisted it was better to let me go. Each of them blamed the other, their stories never quite aligning. The trial was scheduled for November, about 2 years after Arthur's death. Veronica prepared me extensively. The key to our defense was simple: the law was on our side. Arthur had legally adopted me. His assets were his to distribute as he chose. My biological parents had no claim to anything he'd owned. But as anyone who's been through the legal system knows, what should happen and what does happen aren't always the same thing. 3 weeks before trial, Veronica called me with unexpected news. "The judge assigned to our case is Margaret Pennington." I just got the notification. My heart stopped. "Arthur's daughter?" "Yes. She's been a family court judge in Dallas County for 8 years. I should have anticipated this possibility, but with dozens of judges in the system, the odds seem slim." "What does this mean?" "It means your parents' attorney will immediately file for recusal. They'll argue she can't be impartial because she's Arthur's biological daughter and your legal sister. Whether the recusal is granted depends on the specific arguments and Judge Pennington's response." The motion for recusal was filed the next day. My parents' attorney argued that Judge Pennington had both a familial relationship to me and a potential financial interest in protecting Arthur's estate distribution. Veronica filed a response pointing out that Judge Pennington had already received her inheritance from Arthur's estate independently, had no financial stake in my portion, and was professionally capable of impartiality. The recusal hearing took place 2 weeks before the scheduled trial. Judge Pennington presided over her own hearing, which was standard procedure. She listened to both arguments carefully, her face neutral and professional. "Mr. Harris," she addressed my parents' attorney, "you argue that my relationship to the defendant creates an appearance of bias. I acknowledge that Arthur Pennington was my father and that he legally adopted Emma Morrison. However, I had minimal contact with Emma during her childhood as I lived in Arizona while they lived in Texas. My father's estate was settled independently of these proceedings. I have no financial interest in the outcome of this case. The question before this court is purely legal. Do the plaintiffs have a valid claim to assets distributed through a legal adoption and will? My personal feelings about my father don't change the legal standards that apply." She paused, reviewing her notes. "However, I also recognize that even the appearance of impropriety can undermine public confidence in the judicial system. Mr. Harris, I'm denying your motion for recusal, but I'm making my reasoning clear for the record. If you believe my rulings during trial demonstrate actual bias rather than legal interpretation, you'll have grounds for appeal. But I won't recuse myself based on speculation about how I might rule." My parents' attorney looked frustrated but had no choice but to accept the decision. The trial took place in the 68th District Court of Dallas County. The courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all marble and authority. I dressed conservatively: navy blazer, white blouse, minimal jewelry. Veronica had coached me on courtroom demeanor: calm, composed, confident. My parents arrived with their attorney and several people I didn't recognize, presumably character witnesses. My mother wore a church-appropriate dress and carried a Bible. My father wore an ill-fitting suit. They'd clearly been coached on presentation too. The bailiff stood at the front as we all took our seats. All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Pennington. Judge Pennington entered through the side door in her black robes, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She was 65 years old, Arthur's only child, the daughter who'd lived in Arizona and flown home for his funeral. Despite the recusal hearing, seeing her on the bench still felt surreal. Judge Pennington took her seat and reviewed the case file. When she looked up, her gaze swept the courtroom with calm authority. This court will now hear arguments in Morrison v. Morrison. Mr. Harris, you represent the plaintiffs? Yes, Your Honor. Present your case. What followed was 3 hours of my parents' attorney trying to build a case for why two people who'd abandoned their child deserved money from the man who'd raised her. He argued emotional distress, loss of parental consortium, and financial hardship. He presented my parents as victims of circumstance who'd been robbed of their daughter by a wealthy stranger with resources they couldn't match. Judge Pennington listened without expression, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed the weakness in their arguments. Mr. Harris, you're aware your clients were never charged with child abandonment? Yes, Your Honor. They cooperated with authorities and they cooperated by disappearing to California and providing no forwarding address? They were struggling, Your Honor. They made a poor decision in a moment of crisis. A crisis they resolved by moving across the country and starting over without their daughter? They were young. They were 24 and 26. Old enough to be held accountable for their choices. The attorney pivoted to emotional arguments. He called my mother to the stand, where she testified tearfully about missing me, regretting her choice, wanting a relationship. She claimed Arthur had prevented her from contacting me, though she couldn't explain why she'd never attempted to reach out through official channels. Judge Pennington's questions cut through the performance. Mrs. Morrison, did you ever file a petition to regain custody of your daughter? I didn't know how, Your Honor. You didn't consult an attorney? We couldn't afford one. Yet you moved to Los Angeles, had another child, and maintained a household for 19 years without ever attempting to contact Emma? My mother struggled for an answer. I thought it was better for her. I thought she was happy. But now that she's inherited money, you've decided it's time to reconnect? That's not what this is about. Then explain to this court why you filed this lawsuit mere months after learning of my father's death and Emma's inheritance. Silence. When it was Veronica's turn, she methodically dismantled every argument. She presented documentation of the abandoned at DFW Airport, the police reports, the emergency custody proceedings. She showed Arthur's meticulous records of my upbringing, school records, medical appointments, extracurricular activities. She demonstrated his consistent financial investment in my future through regular contributions to my college fund. She called me to the stand. I testified about Arthur's love, his dedication, his deliberate choice to live modestly while ensuring my needs were met. I explained how he taught me the value of education, hard work, and compassion. I described the letter he'd left me, his reasons for keeping his wealth private. Did Arthur Pennington ever speak negatively about your biological parents? Veronica asked. Never. He told me they'd made a choice that hurt me, but he never badmouthed them or tried to poison me against them. He focused on building our life together. Did he encourage you to search for them? He said if I ever wanted to find them, he'd support that decision. I chose not to. Why? Because they'd abandoned me, and Arthur had chosen me. He was my father in every way that mattered. My parents' attorney tried to shake my testimony on cross-examination, suggesting Arthur had manipulated me or influenced my memories. Judge Pennington shut down that line of questioning. Mr. Harris, the witness was 5 years old when she was abandoned. Her memories of that event don't require manipulation. She remembers what happened because it was traumatic. The trial concluded late on the second day. Judge Pennington announced she would review all evidence and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Court was adjourned. As everyone filed out, my mother tried to approach me in the hallway. Veronica smoothly intercepted her. Mrs. Morrison, you should speak to your attorney about appropriate contact. My mother looked at me with desperate eyes. Emma, please. We're family. No, I said quietly. We're not. Family shows up. Family stays. You're strangers who share my DNA. The ruling came down 12 days later. Veronica called me at school during lunch, barely containing her excitement. You need to sit down for this. Judge Pennington's decision was 32 pages long and absolutely scathing. She methodically addressed every claim my parents had made and found each one without merit. She cited Texas law on adoption, parental rights termination, and estate distribution. She referenced case precedents going back 40 years. But the most powerful section was personal. Judge Pennington wrote about her father's character, his careful consideration in choosing to adopt me, his dedication to providing stable, loving care. She noted that Arthur could have simply reported my abandonment and walked away, but he'd chosen to give a traumatized child a home. She addressed my parents directly in her conclusion. The plaintiffs claim that they were deprived of their parental relationship by Arthur Pennington's intervention is disingenuous at best and fraudulent at worst. They deprived themselves of that relationship when they consciously chose to abandon their 5-year-old daughter in a public place and flee the jurisdiction. No court can restore what they willingly surrendered. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile. Furthermore, Judge Pennington ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, which had exceeded $120,000. She noted that their lawsuit was frivolous and appeared motivated solely by financial gain. My parents filed an appeal. It was denied. They attempted to take their case to a higher court. That was also denied. Finally, nearly 2 years after they'd first shown up at my school, the legal battle ended completely. I never heard from them again. Life continued. I kept teaching, kept using my resources to help students who needed support. I established a scholarship fund in Arthur's name for students from difficult backgrounds who showed academic promise and good character. The first year's recipient was a girl named Ashley whose mother was in prison and whose grandmother was raising her on disability income. By the time I was 30, Ashley had graduated from community college and was working toward her degree in social work. I met my husband when I was 29. Daniel was a middle school science teacher, kind and patient, with a wicked sense of humor and a deep commitment to his students. We bonded over our shared belief that education could change lives. I told him about Arthur on our third date, wanting him to understand where I came from. He sounds like he was an amazing man, Daniel said. He was my whole world for 16 years. I'm glad he found you at that airport. I'm glad he decided I was worth staying for. Daniel proposed a year later at the Dallas Arboretum, Arthur's favorite place. We'd scattered his ashes there per his wishes, under the oak tree where he used to read to me on Saturday afternoons. We got married in a small ceremony with close friends and a retired family court judge officiating. Judge Margaret Pennington had retired the previous year and had become a cherished presence in my life, the sister I'd never really known but who shared my love for the man who'd saved me. My father would be so proud of you, Margaret told me at the reception. You became exactly who he hoped you'd be. I'm 34 now. Daniel and I have 2 daughters, Grace, who's 6, and Lucy, who's 3. We live in the same modest Dallas suburb where Arthur raised me, just 3 streets over from his old house. My daughters visit Papa Arthur's oak tree regularly, where I tell them stories about the man who taught me that family isn't about biology. I still teach 3rd grade. I'll have access to the final portion of my inheritance next year when I turn 35. Daniel and I have discussed using it to open a learning center for at-risk youth, a place where kids like I once was can find support, tutoring, and adults who believe in their potential. Sometimes I think about my biological parents. I don't hate them anymore. I pity them. They missed out on knowing me, on watching me grow into someone Arthur helped me become. They chose money over connection, greed over grace. They showed up demanding what they'd never earned and left with nothing but legal debt and the knowledge that their daughter built a beautiful life without them. Arthur used to tell me that the best revenge is living well. He was right about that, as he was about most things. I don't need revenge against Linda and Frank Morrison. Their punishment is knowing they threw away something precious that someone else treasured. Every night, I tuck my daughters into bed and tell them I love them. I make sure they know they're wanted, valued, and worth staying for. I show them through actions what Arthur showed me, that choosing someone every single day is what makes you family. Last week, Grace asked me about the man in the picture frame on my nightstand, the old photograph of Arthur holding 5-year-old me at the zoo. That's Papa Arthur, I told her. He was my daddy, and he was the best person I ever knew. Where is he now? He's gone, sweetheart. But he left me something more valuable than anything else in the world. What? He left me knowing I was worth loving. And that's a gift I'll give to you and your sister every day of my life. She thought about this seriously, the way 6-year-olds do. Did your first parents love you? I don't think they knew how, I said honestly. But Papa Arthur loved me enough for everyone. Grace hugged me tightly. I'm glad Papa Arthur found you. Me too, baby. Me too. Sometimes on difficult days, when teaching feels overwhelming or parenthood feels impossible, I pull out Arthur's letter and reread the words he wrote all those years ago. The paper is worn now, creased from countless readings, but the message remains clear. I was always worthy of love. I was always enough. I was always worth staying for. A stranger in an airport proved that to a scared 5-year-old girl. I spend my life proving it to others. That's the inheritance that matters most. Not the money, not the security, but the absolute certainty that I was chosen. That someone looked at me and decided I was worth everything. My parents came back demanding payment for DNA they'd contributed. But real parenthood isn't biology. It's showing up. It's staying. It's choosing someone every single day even when it's hard. Arthur Pennington taught me that lesson at baggage claim carousel number 7 at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport on an August afternoon in 1998. He kept teaching it until the day he died. And I'll keep passing it forward until the day I die too. That's the real victory. Not the courtroom triumph or the dismissed lawsuit, but the life I built from the foundation Arthur provided. My parents thought they could swoop in and claim what they'd never earned. Instead, they got exactly what they deserved, nothing. Meanwhile, I got everything: love, family, purpose, and the knowledge that Arthur's choice to save me that day changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone I go on to teach, help, and love. The best revenge really is living well. Arthur knew that. Judge Pennington knew that. And now my daughters know it too. Some families are born. Some families are chosen. Arthur chose me when I needed someone most. That's a story worth telling. That's a legacy worth honoring. That's an inheritance no lawsuit could ever touch.